Hey, it's been so long. And I love you all so much. That's not really true. I don't really know you, so I can't really love you in anything more than like a I love everybody in the world sense because they're all valuable and that was getting weird. So, here's what's up. That last screencast of Hume hopefully introduced the idea. People were able to make their way through it and get a handle on this, at least his positive thesis. The notion that what he's trying to do is say, hey, it's not about reason. It's not about figuring this stuff out logically. It's not about objective science or something the way that we might want other disciplines to be. The best explanation we can give of morality is creatures like us are capable of empathizing with other creatures. And so we have those empathic responses to witnessing particular behaviors. And when we empathize with people who are experiencing pain at the hands of someone else, we say something wrong is going on. And when they're experiencing pleasure, we say there's something going right. So one of the important things that gets lost to people in that distinguishes Hume from someone like Mill is that the sentimentalist is saying that what people refer to as a second order emotion, the sentiment, specifically the sentiment is what makes it a moral judgment. So it has to be a feeling about a feeling. That's what it means to say it's a second order judgment. Or, right, higher order thinking is higher not because it's better, just because it's a level above. It's looking down on the other thinking, is the way philosophers would probably talk about it. So these are feelings about feelings. The sentiment isn't the pain or pleasure. And if we're focused on pain or pleasure, we aren't focused on the sentiment. The sentiment is the emotional reaction, that empathic. It has to be based on empathy or it's not a sentiment either. Your empathic feeling in response to something you witness. So in my puppy kicking example, you observe the puppy and you empathize with the puppy's pain, right? People talk about, oh, I felt their pain. No, you don't. No one's feeling literally someone else's pain. You're empathizing with it. You know, the sorts of examples we can use, right? Like if you've gone to a friend's open mic night and they were terrible, right? You feel, right? Like, oh, there's nothing worse, right? Like, or seen a performance and you feel so bad for them because you're like, oh my God, they're really trying hard and everybody's cringing because their guitar's out of tune or something, and they can't sing or write a song, right? Because you feel for them. You want them to be happy. So that's empathy. That's what Hume's talking about. He's not talking about the pain or pleasure. And that's going to be important to remember, because I want to walk you through the question I asked in this assignment. And the reason I asked do this assignment this way is it's forcing you to do a little bit of analysis of the reading. So I'm going to start with a little bit to prime our pump and prep us with the two biggest arguments in there, or that are reflective of two claims he's trying to make, the arguments in there. And they're really generally trying to argue, and will be cases people use as to illustrate what he's trying to argue when he says reason, right? Again, reason, the ability, the faculty we have to determine true or false just by thinking about something. And he breaks reason down into being capable of doing two things, right? Practical reason, kind of, or scientific reasoning, right, is a reminder. I can take that information I learned through my senses, empirical evidence. I get information from my senses, and then I piece it together, and reason helps me create a story to make inferences and connect the dots, right? I always use the example of a marker falling, right? There's nothing to take a picture of that's gravity. Gravity is our best explanation of what happens when two roughly middle-size-ish objects encounter one another, like a marker and the earth, right? So it's something between them, but I don't have a picture of it, right? The measure of it is the movement of the marker. And so we're using our brains to connect the dots. And and we create a story. And that story is, hey, we call it gravity, and we can test it over and over again, and it works. And we say, hey, gravity works. Pretty damn sure of it. So that's matter-of-fact reasoning. And he's going to say, you cannot find morality in doing science like that. Now, the other sort of reasoning reminder is the relationship between concepts, right? Purely theoretically. The relationship between, same example again, 2 plus 2. If I know what that 2 symbol means, and a plus symbol, and another 2, and an equal sign, if I know what those symbols mean, it's always objectively going to be universally true that the relationship between them yields a 4. We may be able to change the definitions of what those symbols represent, but 2 plus 2 equals 4 every time once we know what those words mean and those concepts mean. That'll be theoretical reasoning, right? Like just thinking about it, we can figure it out. Picture a 3 and only 3-sided figure. A triangle. Woo, we all got it right because we're all rational to some degree. Those are the sorts of examples we can use. So what Hume's going to want to do is strategy in saying reason doesn't work is to say, hey, if reason is only capable of these 2 things, then if I can show that these 2 things are incapable of giving us any moral insight, then I will have shown that reason is incapable of determining any sort of foundation for ethics. Now, he does this in a bunch of different ways, and he has to break that down a little further. But the most general ones, I'm going to give you 2 general examples of arguments from the text. And then we'll go in and I'll look at a couple other. The examples that are probably the most popular that people use, right? He wants to say, hey, science isn't going to find you morality, and if you're looking for it there, you're just looking in the wrong place. If you're trying to look at it in a certain way as like, these are facts in the world. There are properties of things somewhere that are right and wrong. They're not. And this is a good reminder, like, when we're trying to argue for a particular theory or against a particular, we can't beg any questions. We come into it wanting to think, well, of course murder's wrong. You got to say, no, I have no reason to believe murder's wrong until I prove it. Maybe Hume's right, so I got to throw all my beliefs out the window. Let's start again. And what he's saying is, cool, start again from scratch. If you're going to have a foundation, where's it going to come from? If you're going to say, he says willful murder, because the word murder was meaning something slightly different then. If we were to start from scratch and to try to have to prove why something was wrong, and something like willful murder, he's saying, what is reason going to get you? What is reasoning about it? Practical reasoning. We'll use that one, right? Like science. You come visit me in a class one day because you're like, oh my God, I had the best online teacher in the history of the world. Probably the greatest experience I've ever had in my life. Should probably name my first 3 children after him, which is uncomfortable because now you have to call him Chad 1, 2, and 3. And it's sort of like a Dr. Seuss thing. Oh, a Dr. Seuss thing because I think they were thing 1 and thing 2. That is some of the worst comedy I've ever done in my life. That's twice in the last day I've done really horrible philosoph comedy. It was terrible. Oh, so, the other time was I made a pun on Kant because I posted something to a Kant article to the content. All right. Why do I allow myself to do those little tangents? Cognitive flexibility, because I'm challenging you to shift gears from one gear to another and back and forth and back and forth. Because that's going to be one of the 5 most important things employers are looking for in 2020. Now, we've tested our cognitive flexibility a little bit. Where were we? We were talking about willful murder, okay? Let's look at murder through a lens of science and say, from scratch, we can't make any assumptions without proving it. We can't just beg the question and say, oh, well, it's wrong. Of course it's wrong. How could it not be wrong? Life's valuable. In philosophy, if I was going to say, well, of course it's wrong because life's valuable, what do I have to prove? You got to give me an argument for why life is valuable. Have to. And so Hume's saying, start from scratch. Imagine, don't beg any questions. Don't come in any assumptions. You come to visit Chad in the class because the real reason you would have, you were like on the Front Range campus because you had to file some paperwork to get your student loan or something. And you're like, oh, maybe I'll go see if Chad's here. And someone tells you, oh, yes, class there. You're like, all right, I'm going to go peek in the room. And you go, and you're there in between classes. No one's around, and you peek in the room, and there I am, dead on the floor. Dead, you assume. With a dry erase marker next to me. I need a prop. A dry erase marker next to me, on the floor. 473 little holes in my body. Black marker. Next to me on the floor, blunt. What happened? It's a mystery. You need to get all the scientific facts you can about it. Because Hume's challenge is to say, right now is kind of saying, hey, if it's going to be about science, if it's going to be something you can find out there in the world, if it's going to be something about the things in the world, just like gravity is about markers and worlds, then you've got to find, using science, observing it, where the wrong was, if there was a wrong, in Chad's death. So, who do we need for this? We need all of the cast members from every version of CSI ever made. Except they're real people. We're making them real people. We're making like real, actual forensic scientists, like forensic scientists on TV. So you've got like that Grissom dude from Las Vegas who's like looking at insects, larvae, and telling you when the time of death was. And I get that other dude like scraping fingernail business, whatever. But, we're also going to have all the people from Criminal Minds. We have this, like, those fictional profilers, right? Like, as if that's a thing, kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to walk into the room and sense and view and tell you everything psychological about it. But the good thing about that is we get the dreamy dude from that. I always love talking about that guy because he's so cool in a way. And he's totally dreamy. What's his name? Something Keebler. Oh, no, he's not a Keebler elf. Someone's going to know it and post it in a discussion board post for everybody to see and be like, okay, you're a total Criminal Minds fan. But the one dude who's like, there's always like a child prodigy, super genius, who's super empathic with everybody or whatever and can just ask a few questions and psychologically determine everything about everyone ever. And so his name might be Spencer in that? Maybe not. So you have just picture every fictional detective and forensic scientist and forensic psychologist ever in any movie ever. And they're all real. All of them. And they come to the scene of this crime. So you're going to have all of the conceivably possible evidence you can have regarding this case. They're all there. They're like, they've got their little bags and their scraping things. What are they going to be looking for, right? Like they're going to be looking for, right? Fingerprints, right? And they'll take the fingerprints back to the lab and put them in a glass thing and smoke will happen. And then there's a giant computer screen with different fingerprints. It scrolls through at 1,000,000 miles an hour and it stops on one and goes blink, 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 blink. I just go through that because it's so ridiculous. Like, right? Like that happens in movies. That's not real. That's not real. There's no room with a 60-foot screen TV just displaying fingerprints. And they don't even take them with the smoky business, but it looks better for TV. Again, cognitive flexibility all over the place. So, the question is, right, like, what we're focused on is, what evidence can we have that this was wrong? Without begging the question. Without making assumption. Because if it's going to be about reason or science or God's work in the world or whatever we want, if it's out there in the world, we should be able to find it. And if we can't, we're lying to ourselves when we say we have good, well-supported moral beliefs. And Hume's saying, sweet, show it to me. Show it to me. Here's a case that is the wrongest shit anybody ever... We all agree murder is wrong. So where is the wrongness in this? So we have a marker. We've got 472 holes in Chad's body. We have skin from under my fingernails, right? Because they were defensive wounds. We look around for fingerprints and DNA evidence, and there's some hair under my fingernails, and what else will there be? Footprints. Is there any video from the room going in and out, right? Like there's all the stuff you're going to find. You can think of like 10,000 other things that they'd be looking for, and the bugs in the room, and the temperature of my body. And then you can like make some psychological assumptions. I was stabbed 472 freaking times. It wasn't a professional hit. How do we know that? Because a professional isn't going to take the time to stab someone 472 times. It's increasing the possibility of them getting found or stumbled upon. So you know it was a crime of passion. Someone was feeling spectacularly pissed at me. We know all of these things. We find out exactly who it is. Steve. Poor Steve is guilty of everything in my examples these days. Steve. We don't know Steve. It doesn't matter. You go to court. And the judge is asking the defense. By the way, they handed off all the evidence to like the best lawyers from Law and Order. Pick one of them. I think between those three shows, we've cut... One of those three shows is on all times everywhere in the history of the world. Law and Order, CSI, Criminal Minds. It's totally true. There's so many versions of that show being replayed so many different places. So, what happens is we hand him off to Sam Waterston, and he's taking it in, and he's like, being awesome, and Sam Waterston, DA guy, and asking questions and looking sophisticated and awesome and really being passionate and awesome. And he calls for evidence number 1 through 693,000. And we have a confession. We know who did it. We've got evidence bag after evidence bag after evidence bag after evidence locker after whatever, blah, 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 blah. All of those things, we know exactly what happened. And Hume's going to say, cool. Where's the evidence bag that you open up and it says, wrong? Where's the piece of evidence that says it's wrong? There isn't any. There's no evidence. There's no physical stuff that you can describe or look to and point to and say, aha, that's what makes it wrong. That I'm dead. Not wrong. Death isn't inherently wrong. It's just a fact about the world. Things die. That I was stabbed 472 times. That doesn't tell me it was wrong. It tells me I was stabbed 472 times. Right? That blow number 43 was the one that killed me. That just tells me that's the one that killed me. The person was angry. Okay. Tells me they were angry. No facts about the world are capable in Hume's mind of saying wrong. You can have all of the evidence, all of the facts about any event, and this is what undermines some really popular moral beliefs in a huge way and demonstrates, wow, there's no argument for them. Right? Like, what's a really great example? I'll use this one. Right? Like homosexuality. Where in the fact, where is there a fact about that we say is wrong? Oh, well, they can't have babies. Well, they could. They could have babies in a bunch of different ways, but let's say they couldn't. Why is that wrong? Well, because. Why? Why would that be wrong? Because it happens. Well, so what? Well, hypothetically, survival of the species. Well, 1, why is survival of the species any good? 2, we could survive. We can make babies in test tubes. We don't need gay people making babies through heterosexual intercourse. Nobody needs that. Right? Like, so that is an example, a real world example. We have the really specific basic example of my murder, which, by the way, even though we can't find out that it's wrong through the evidence, it's objectively wrong. Any case that ends in me dead is wrong. Except for the hypothetical case I use when I'm 100 and have been perfectly healthy till I'm 100 and I die silently and quietly in my sleep after watching my daughter get married and is happy and not get married and live a good long life. But no, right? Why do we think these things are wrong? Hume's answer is because we have feelings about them. But we can't recognize or accept that because of culture or society or the way we were raised or religious belief. So we pretend there are these other reasons, but none of them even exist. We have no good reason to say, life is better than death. We ought to, right? Like, or something like, I was like, gay marriage is wrong. Some people, well, but it undermines, what does it undermine? And why is that thing good? His only response will be, you're looking in the wrong place, right? We'll go back to the positive thesis. When we look at a case of willful murder, we cannot look at the matters of fact, which is one of the only things that reason can judge, and find anywhere in it right and wrong. If we just look at the facts of the matter, those are going to be purely descriptive. There's not going to be any normativity in them at all. Dead, stabbed 472 times, black marker, temperature in the room, temperature of his body, defensive wounds, crime and passion, I have Steve's confession, whatever. Right? All of those are just facts. None of them tell us right or wrong. That's a big part of what Hume's saying. So he's saying practical reason as a means by which we get scientific information about the world can't do a damn thing with regard to right and wrong. So maybe then the rationalist, right, the person who wants to rely on reason as a foundation for morality, is going to say, well, it's not matters of fact, it's relations of ideas. So he has another example for you. And this one will be shorter, because I'll skip all the tangents and stuff to challenge you to bounce back and forth, because this one can be a little trickier for people. Right? Hey, it's just a relationship, like our relationship between non-contradiction, the relationship between two propositions, such that one proposition and its contradiction cannot both be true. Right? My name is Chad, not my name is Chad. Those two things cannot be true at the same time. My name is Chad is true, or not. It's not the case that my name is Chad is true. One of those two. They can't both be true. Right? My name could be Chad and Steve. That would be weird, because I couldn't have killed myself, because it'd be really hard to stab oneself 472 times. So I'm not that Steve. So relationship between ideas, maybe we would determine morality is right or wrong based on reason in that way. We just look for contradictions or relational properties that show us that it's false. Like morality is just 2 + 2 = 5. So right and wrong are like math equations. We see 2 + 2 = 4 and we say true, and 2 + 2 = 5 and we say false. And that's all we're doing, making judgments. So reason can somehow save the day if it just shows that there's relationships in the world between ideas that lead us to objectively right or wrong answers like math. And Hume says that'd be awesome, except it just can't work. Because there's nothing in morality that has anything to do with relations of ideas in ways that are meaningful. And he gives an example that I'll flesh out a little bit about gratitude. And it's one of the examples in the reading. It's tied very closely to one of the examples in the reading of his parricide example, which is just a general term for matricide or patricide, parent killing. And he gives the example of the tree, which is a really cool example, because he says, hey, if a rational principle is going to hold, it's got to hold all the time everywhere, right? 2 + 2 = 4, except on Sundays, doesn't work. It's no longer a principle. And what he's going to say is, cool, so give me a principle, just like, right, like he was saying, we all agree murder's wrong. Sweet. Let's look at murder and I can show you. It's wrong? Sure, it's wrong. But it's sure as hell not wrong because of reason or information I found out about it through science. Now, the other side of the coin, hey, cool. We'll just go with theoretical relationships. Well, what if we look at gratitude? Ingratitude, right? Like he's going to say, that's something he feels like people generally will say is wrong. A child, he says, gives the example of killing its parent. And that's what he's doing in that elm tree example. He's saying, cool, if a child killing its parent's wrong and reason's going to tell us, then it always ought to be wrong. But in a strictly biological sense, the oak tree is the parent of the sapling, and the sapling can grow up and block out the sun and kill its parent tree, and no one's saying that's wrong. And that example works in a whole bunch of different cool ways, because ultimately you'll say one of the reasons it doesn't is they don't have any feelings. We don't care. There's nothing to empathize with. But more specifically, I'll give an example like I won Powerball, right? And you guys were awesome, so I just emailed everybody and said, hey, everybody gets $1 million for a scholarship for the rest of your life. What's the appropriate response to that? Some degree of gratitude, like thanks would be cool. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chad. That's nice of you. Wow, you really changed my life. Anything like that would be remotely appropriate. Now, inappropriate, and well, what people would say would be wrong, would be like, screw you, you ass. Why didn't you give me more? Selfish jerk. You should have given all your money to me because I'm cooler than you. Why are you so cheap? Those might be things people consider to be ingracious or ungrateful, right? Expressing ingratitude. So Hume's argument would be like, okay, cool. So if we look at these things we judge to be right and wrong, and we're really saying they're right or wrong based on reason and rationality, then they should generate rational principles like 2 + 2 = 4 that hold all the time. So what would that principle be with gratitude, by the way? Well, it seems that it would be something like, respond to kindness with gratitude. Okay? Respond to positive with positive. Respond to unkindness with ingratitude. Someone's mean to you, be mean back to them. Or do something negative. But we have a problem there that we can't explain with just facts or principles. Right? You want examples? An example of, particularly in the Western tradition, everybody, whether they believe in the divine nature of Christ or not, whether he was actually real, historical figure, or just a character in a book, people respond to that story and say, holy shit. Either because he's totally divine, or just because it's a really cool parable. Doesn't matter which. We look at that and say, man, dude turned the other cheek, right? Or we look at Gandhi, or Dr. King, or whomever. We're saying in certain circumstances there are ways to react to unkindness, like to meanness, is with kindness and forgiveness, right? Christ is like literally the Son of God, could start whooping ass at any moment and jump down from the cross, is willfully going through excruciating pain and saying, bring it on. And I forgive you for it, and I'm doing it for you. Not just the whole world, but the very people who are killing him, right? He's dying for them and like forgiving them simultaneously in this spectacular show of whatever it is. Now, whether that's true or not, or real or not, if it's real, it makes it even more support for Hume's case that he'd be like, hey, look, you are not going to find reason in that. You can't come up with principles from that. Because you're saying, right, like if we answer P with P, then we answer not P with not P. But all over the place we can find all these inconsistencies. They're totally inconsistent. Sometimes the best people, the things we think are the very best and we want to say are the most morally righteous, are when people respond to a lack of kindness or cruelty or someone objectifying them or treating them as less than human, responding to it with forgiveness and understanding. Right? And patience. Hume's kind of saying that all has to go out the window if it's going to just be a rational calculation. But how could we explain that? We could explain that because really what we're focused on and really what matters is our feelings of empathy for the people involved. Our feelings of empathy for Chad when he's murdered. Right? What makes the murder wrong, if it's wrong, is that you or whomever, as the observer of it, knows, holy shit, he had a life he wanted to lead. He had a future he wanted to experience. He has a daughter and a family and more students to torture and frustrate. And it probably hurt like hell getting stabbed 472 times with a seriously blunt object. Like an X-Men marker is a really shitty murder weapon. Someone was really pissed. And he really suffered. And Hume saying that's what makes it wrong is your empathic response. You take that feeling and you say, damn, thumbs down. Strong sense of disapproval. And that disapproval is the sentiment. Now you say, oh, why not a rational principle like, blah, blah, like, be gracious. We don't have consistent principles like that. The principles change. Yeah, you may cheer once in a while when the bully gets his ass kicked, but you also might cheer when the bully gets reformed by someone giving an act of kindness. It's like every children's story. And it's probably pretty close to psychologically true. Why are people bullies? Why are people mean? Why are people assholes? Why are people Harvey Weinstein? And using their position of power to objectify and torture and exert control over other people. Why are people that way? Because they don't like themselves. Like, no one really happy with themselves is saying mean or unkind or hurtful words to anybody else for any reason, good reason. Right? Like, what's the point? People do it to make themselves feel better. So, right, like in that children's story, the bully who hates themselves for some reason, doesn't have any friends and is bullying the kid, and then, hey, I really just wanted a friend, and it's like, oh, well, you can play with us as long as you're nice with us. Cool, and now everybody's happy. That we empathize with like crazy. And he's saying that's because it's about the feeling. The feeling is what makes it right or wrong. You see that and you say, hey, look, everybody's happier now. Woo, thumbs up, approval. And that feeling of approval is the sentiment. So, those are two examples. The willful murder example and the gratitude example, right? Of him saying, hey, look, rationalists. Hell, it's a version of rationalism is sort of the premise for this whole course. Chad keeps going through, oh, can't have contradiction, no penguins, no tacos, no folded up pieces of pizza, right? No contradictions, because contradictions can't be true. Well, guess what? Morality's not going to work that way, Hume says. Because if rationalism's going to work and be true, then there can't be exceptions because they're all contradictions. You have to accept that if you're basing it on reason, which you have been. Hume's saying to the world. Look at murder. There's no fact about the world in there that I can determine that tells me it's wrong. You have to go with something else. Okay, well, how about a relational principle? Cool. But I've found an exception to your own rule. I've found places where the principle doesn't hold. It's really all about feelings. And both of these examples serve as penguins to the rationalist. They're both exceptions. And that's what he's doing through the entirety of the reading. So, when we look at the reading, these examples I've given you, this is where it's like you get 5 points for just sticking it through and looking at my stupid face for 32 minutes and 28 seconds. Man, I timed that well. To put the affair, therefore, to this trial, let us choose any inanimate object, such as an oak or elm, and let us suppose that by dropping of its seed, it produces a sapling below it, which, springing up by degrees, at last overtops and destroys the parent tree. I ask, if in this instance there be wanting any relation which is discoverable in parasite or ingratitude. Now, the language sucks. Sorry. Scottish dude, a long time ago, writing in weird language. What does that mean? The tree grows up, gets bigger than its parent, steals the light, parent tree dies. So, he's talking about trying to examine, here are the ways that if reason is right, if reason is the way to go morality, then it has to answer all these circumstances. And it seems like if reason were generating principles that were universal, they would have to apply all the time everywhere, including to plants. Right? They'd have to apply, because 2 + 2 = 4, whether or not I'm counting people or dogs or cows or pebbles. So if it's a rational principle that's going to be universally applied, let's do it. So which argument is that that he's trying to make? Which exception to the rationalist is he trying to make? Mistakes of fact are not moral wrongs in and of themselves. That doesn't seem to be a mistake of fact. Mistakes regarding understanding of right and wrong are not in themselves moral wrongs. There's no mistake of understanding. The wrongness of an act does not rely in the relationship between external objects, be they persons or things. That could be it. Relationship between conscious beings. No, not every sentiment is legitimate. C. Definitely C. What are the two external objects? The trees. Right? We were talking about reason as being able to determine relationships between things, ideas. And the ideas in this case are our ideas of these trees and our idea of gratitude. And he's saying, look, here's an exception. Here's a penguin. You want to say that it's all about relationships between ideas, that it's theoretical reason, that it's principles like 2 plus 2 equals 4? Well, you all agree ingratitude or killing your parent is wrong. Cool. Here's a tree killing its parent. It's not wrong if we go based on reason. But of course we think killing parents is wrong. Why? Because of feelings. Because the parents have feelings, the children have feelings. We empathize with those feelings, and we say that it's wrong. And that feeling of thumbs down is what determines it. Okay, number 2. 'Tis certain that an action on many occasions may give rise to false conclusions in others, and that a person who through a window sees any lewd behavior of mine and my neighbor's wife may be so simple as to imagine she is certainly my own. Right? Like, hey, all sorts of actions I can commit to will give people misinformation or a misunderstanding regarding right and wrong. Right? That misunderstanding is one of the only ways he says, is that what you're talking about is wrong? Is like someone's making a mistake and that mistake is the source of the moral wrongness? Like they're making a mistake in observing a science experiment? Because that could be a matter of fact. That could make sense, right? Like really all moral wrongs are just cognitive mistakes or intellectual mistakes or someone getting the information wrong. Well, that seems weird in this circumstance, because if you walk by and see me getting it on with some woman and you assume it's my wife, and I'm Hume, that's his example, the only mistake being made is you thought it was my wife. Right? That's the only mistake. We're both happy and psyched to be cheating on my wife, my Humean wife, and you're thrilled, and we're thrilled. You don't think there was a wrong done because you assumed it was my wife. It wasn't. So the only mistake anyone's making in that circumstance that could be considered a mistake of reasoning is your observation. Right? Excuse me. So, mistakes of fact are not moral wrongs in and of themselves. Mistakes regarding understanding of right and wrong are not in of themselves moral wrongs. It's one of those first two. We're going to hold on to it. Or for the sake of time, I'll just tell you. Go with B. Because the mistake is, right? And really I don't like the way I wrote that. So I'm going to give anybody, if you do A or B for this one, I'll give you credit for it. But really the kind of claim he's trying to say is, we have a mistake regarding the circumstances of the fact, but that doesn't generate the rightness or wrongness of it. Right? Your mistake as the observer is not what makes it wrong. What makes it wrong is, Hume would argue, right, for Hume's account, that being cheated on sucks. That I'm hurting my wife, or I could conceivably be hurting my wife, and that she could be hurting her husband or significant other if she has one. Right? For Hume, that's where it is. You empathize with that situation, and you're pissed if you accurately assess it. Why? Because you feel and judge, boo, hiss, I don't want to be cheated on, Hume, you cheating son of a bitch. So, that mistake regarding the understanding isn't going to be, isn't what makes it right or wrong. It's the feeling. A fruit, for instance, that is really disagreeable appears to me at a distance, and through mistake I fancy it to be pleasant and delicious. Right? If reason, mistakes in reasoning are mistakes of right and wrong, which is what he's challenging again, he's arguing against this, then it would be the case that any mistake I make is going to have some moral weight to it if I'm making mistakes of facts of the matter, or it would seem like that's an option. And he's like, well, what the hell? If Chad sees an apple across the room, goes over, picks it up, and takes a bite of it, and it's like rotten or made of wax, no one's like, oh, you did something morally wrong. It was in your understanding of the facts about the world, right? And in your understanding of these descriptive claims about the way things are in the world. That's why you did something wrong. That's why it was wrong. No, we just say it was a mistake. We don't say that's wrong. So that's number one. It's a mistake of the fact. The fact of the matter is it was made of wax, not a real apple. We don't say that I did something morally wrong. We just say I made a mistake. But if we're going to say morality is based on understanding the world in a certain way, or it's out there for us to find and discover out there, like a science experiment, whether it's in the way species behave or survive or what things' purposes are, or any sort of property they might have, we're in trouble. Because so what? People make mistakes. Big deal. That's all we could say. Oh, we got some things wrong. We were mistaken. He's going to say, no. If there's something wrong, it's not out there. It's in here. With our feelings. Our second order emotions based on empathy that are sentiments of approve or disapprove. So he's going to say, the eating the apple isn't wrong at all. 4. In like manner, though, 'tis certain a musical voice is nothing but one that naturally gives a particular kind of pleasure. Yet 'tis difficult for a man to be sensible that the voice of an enemy is agreeable, or to allow it to be musical. But a person of fine ear, who has command of himself, can separate these feelings and give praise to what it deserves. I love this argument. I put it in here. No one else doing Hume in an intro class ever is talking about this, and they should. Because one of the things people are going to worry about, and rightly so, when they're thinking about this and going over it and over it and over it again, and I keep repeating myself 1,000 times, hopefully it will help things sink in, is, hey, aren't we all subjective? Aren't there some people who are going to watch you kick the puppy and not care? Aren't there some people who are going to see two people getting into a fight and not care? Aren't there some people who are going to see the stories of Harvey Weinstein and be like, yeah, well, chicks chose to do it. They wanted to be famous. He's in a position of power. It's natural for dudes to want to, it's not natural for dudes to want to do any of the things that he wanted to do. And even if it was, then dudes really suck. And I'm not one of them. Most of you are like, yeah, we already knew that, dude. You're weird. Which is okay. I feel good about it. The idea that it's all going to be totally subjective and that our empathic understanding of other people is just going to be different depending on who we are, and it's just going to be totally subjective, is something a lot of people attribute to Hume. The most common interpretation of Hume is that he's a subjectivist completely with regard to morality. He might have been, but if he was wrong about it. And he gives us a tool to show that it was wrong right here. That tool is pointing out that, hey, if it doesn't get to be wholly subjective because we have to be tapping into the empathy. He's using this analogy here to show that not all moral judgments based on feelings are the same. Some are better than others. And the principal thing that makes some better than others for him is that some are actually accurately empathizing with the person involved. Right? It's easy to say, Justin Bieber's crap, I hate him, brah, rah, rah, because you don't like his music, whatever else. And he's kind of been a little bit of a butthead at times in his life. Sure. But just because you don't like his image or whatever else, you gotta be like, well, yeah, dude was 11 years old and a pretty good drummer and can sing and dance and whatever. I get it. He's a talented kid. And if you were to play me a song of him at his best singing, whatever song, Blind Bieber Test, and I played you him versus 10 average people off the street, of course you'd say, yeah, dude's got a pretty good voice. But if you hate him or you're too cool for him, right? Which is, I'll take you back to being a teenager. You only could like bands that were really cool, and you could only like them before anybody else liked them. And once everybody else liked them, you first had to tell them all, I liked them first. And then you had to not like them anymore. Right? None of that has to do with the quality of the music. And that's what he's saying, is this person you hate more than anything in the world. When you're tapping into this emotional, sentimental reaction, it makes it harder sometimes to empathize with them, but you're capable of doing it if you shut it down. Right? I may hate that person, but if I can judge their singing voice based on their singing voice, I'll be able to say it's okay. I may have, in the back of my head, a whole bunch of voices based on how I was raised, or what I was taught, or what my culture told me, or what the world told me, but I can get rid of big chunks of that and really hone in on, let me empathize with the people involved. So, that argument regarding the musical voice is E. Not every sentiment is legitimate. Sometimes they are caused by our own personal interests, or our biases, or background, or whatever. He wants to say, just like a good scientist should try to be a little objective, so should a good moral judge. Try to be objective, but by refining your instrument of empathy in a way, by getting rid of all secondary kind of external voices, borrowing and mixing some from stuff from other philosophers there. So, incest is the last example, right? I would fain ask anyone why incest in the human species is criminal in the very same action, same relations in animals. We don't think it's morally wrong at all. Right? D, the wrongness of an action does not lie in the relationship between external conscious beings, be they persons or animals. Right? Why is it wrong? Why would incest be wrong? There's no principle. There's no rational judgment. Oh, but your babies might have 6 heads 9 years down the line. Any two people can get together and have a really unfortunate combo of DNA and produce all sorts of genetic infirmities in kids. And it's also not nearly as likely as we think that a brother and sister getting it on would produce some horrifying genetic results. If it was, the Western world we'd all have 9 heads. Because everybody's family tree is a palm at some point, right? You go back far enough, we're going to people where it's like cousins and brothers and sisters and cousins and whatever. All of us. But ultimately, why would that matter? Who cares? What if after seeing me at Bob's, you saw me back in Fort Collins walking down the street and you're like, oh my God, that's Chad. Oh, wow. Oh, that's a little bit of a creepy PDA he's showing with that woman. But I guess it's cool. They're in love. That's awesome. And then you walk up and you say hi to me and talk to me and she leaves and whatever else. And then you're at a field trip at the CDC. Or you get a job at the CDC and you walk by an office. You're like, holy shit. Dr. Amy Kirst. And you see the woman, and you're like, oh my God, Kirst, that must be Chad's wife. And you're like, wait, I didn't think he was married. He had a daughter, but I think he wasn't married. Heck, I couldn't tell if he was gay or straight or what. So you go up and you start talking to her, and she's like, oh, you went to Front Range. I see that. Yeah, my brother teaches there. And you're, what? You saw me making out with my sister. Okay, this example's always a little skeevy for me to do. Why? Because of my own cultural commitments about it, right? Like, and the personal familial ones. Why is that wrong? I'm a decent looking dude. She's beautiful. 2 pretty people exchanging a kiss. All of a sudden it became, ugh, to a lot of you. And me. Maybe a little bit. Not really. Why? I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying, what reasons do we have to believe it's wrong? What reasons do we have to believe that incest is wrong? We're not going to have kids. We're both sterile. We just want to have a loving, committed, caring relationship. We started to have this sort of relationship only after we were adults. What would make it wrong? Unnatural? I don't even know what that means. Of course it's natural. It's happening in the world. See, there's a fact of the matter. What makes it wrong? Nothing. Other than we have trained ourselves to have habits and customs that illustrate and illuminate and create and validate feelings of thumbs up and thumbs down about things. And that is a really great place for me to leave you. Thinking about me getting it on with my sister. Who's real. But she doesn't go by Amy Kerr, so you'll never find her. Ha 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 ha. Don't pester my sister if you meet her. Oh, she'd think it would be funny if you ran into her someday somewhere. Right? Like, why do we think those things are wrong? Hume's saying, because of a feeling, and that sort of feeling is what I'm going to talk to. I'm going to give a really short screencast next. That'll be 10 minutes or less. So I'll get to like a full 2 50-minute lectures for this week, hopefully. Or this next week and a half. Right? He's going to say there are feelings we have that are some are more natural than others. In that we have natural sentiments that come from empathizing with people's actual real, experienced pleasure and pain. And then we have sentiments that are artificial, in that they come from something socially constructed or constructed from our background that serve a political or social purpose. Now, that's not, he can't say, and he doesn't say one of those is necessarily better than the other, but one of them is going to be more kind of authentic and accurate. Because one of them, it might be harder to change. Biologically, it might be harder to change if we actually are empathic creatures. Right? And it might be more important and actually reflective of what's happening in the world. Right? Why would you think that? Because we say that incest example might seem crazy, but every damn time there was a new state passed same-sex marriage, there'd be a picture on the front page of a paper or on a website of two dudes or two women kissing on the courthouse steps, and someone seeing that and being like, oh, gross, outrageous. That's a sin and against nature or God or creation. Cool. Hume, it was just from Hume's perspective. Why? Who are the recipients and the agents? They're the recipients and the agents. Who's the observer? You are. What are you empathizing with? Like, what really could you be empathizing with if you're going to make a moral judgment, according to Hume? Two people who are in love, kissing each other. Usually that's a thumbs up sort of thing. How could it be wrong? Now, that's not to say it's right. I'm just saying from Hume's perspective, you'd want to say, why are you saying it's wrong? Where are the facts saying that it's wrong? There aren't any. So that's where I'll leave you. And next time I'm going to do a really short one on how it might be the case that some sentiments are better than others. And is it possible that we could say, hey, we could build a moral system out of Hume's sentimentalism that wouldn't be radically, totally, and completely subjective. I hope this wasn't too long and boring. I appreciate all of your patience with me. Have an awesome day.